Alright, here we are. This is the big one, the one we all been waiting for. The run-up to 2.0. Obviously, 1.9 is going to come first, and it looks like it's going to build the base for what is going to be a complete and total rework of Stellaris and the mechanics that are being presented in-game. Welcome to Def Diary 91. Today we're going to be talking about Starbases. Now, for those that don't know, well, you probably do if you play the game. Right now, in the game, the way the borders work, if you have an area of space, it will automatically project your borders over several systems. And this is all done through, obviously, a frontier outpost or a planetary system that you own. This is going to change. This is going to change completely. We're going to go into 1.9 Cherryh, which is going to be the upcoming update for Stellaris that, like I mentioned, is going to change everything, and it's most likely the largest update to the game till date. And, well, I think it's gonna basically redesign several elements of the game from the ground up, which is incredibly exciting. And apparently this is gonna take months before it is done, so it's not gonna come anytime soon. Let's jump into it, shall we? Let's go into border rework. So apparently the developers have never really been happy with the way the border system works within the core game. Now obviously the game has been out for a year, and it looks like the entire dev team has been steadily working on new concepts on how to readdress the border system. Basically, you were able to claim ownership of systems that you had never visited, and they are not particularly interested in actually using it, especially if you don't have the ability to reaching those systems, or making it hard to tell what sort of exact border adjustments are being made when planets are seeded or outposts are being built. Effectively, you had no real idea what would happen if you would build new things within your space in terms of a border extrusion, which is the mechanic, current mechanic at least, when it comes to expanding your borders. Apparently they're going to be completely reworking the border system and base it on a solar system ownership value. Every single system will have a single owner with a complete control over that system, and borders are now simply a reflection of system ownership rather than a cause for it to change. So in Cherryh, whoever owns a system is always whoever is always owning a system is based on the owner of the new structure in that system, which is called a starbase. Now, a starbase is a space station which is orbiting the star of said system. Now, every single system, each system can only have a single starbase, which you will need to build most likely individually. I hope that you'll have to, that you can automate this process, as the amount of stars within the game can get pretty ridiculous, especially when you have super large empires, and if you want to expand in a certain direction, that may get a little bit difficult. So this can be anything from a remote outpost to a massive citadel that can basically build its own fleets with having a massive orbital defense station. So a starbase can be upgraded and specialized, and apparently we're going to be talking about that later on. And basically this is going to be the primary way of claiming systems. That means that you will no longer have to fight for colonies in a certain area. You just have to control the system that the colony is in. So, which is kind of interesting, because in the past you could basically claim a planet, and you will get a blob of planets around it, and maybe a bunch of systems in there. You're like, yeah, I don't necessarily want this. Obviously, you always want to have these systems because, you know, border gore, and the more space, the better. Right? Right. However, this is going to change completely. You'll be able to focus on what kind of systems you want, so you can carve up your space a little bit more cleanly in the new update. This is going to completely change the way the Wargirl systems works, as well as obviously it would be system-based and not planet-based, and this is something that's going to be talked about in a couple weeks, so keep your eye peeled when it comes to that. A starbase is now obviously determining ownership. It will no longer be possible to colonize or invade primitive species outside of your borders. So no longer will you be able to... Basically, it becomes a two-step process rather than a single process as it is right now, where you send a colony ship out to a habitable planet colonize it, boom, it's within your territory. What you got to do now, or at least in the upcoming update, is you need to claim that system, and then you can colonize it. Apparently, so Starbases will cost influence to construct, so that's going to be another influence sink, but you will no longer have any cost for colonizing or attacking primitives. So it's kind of swapping around a little bit, but obviously it kind of depends on how things are going to go, but I think the total cost for expanding territory is still going to be interesting there. And apparently Starbases are replacing the Frontier Outpost system completely. Completely gone, no more Frontier Outposts, just system claiming. So let's take a look at Starbase construction. How does it actually work? So as borders from colonies are completely gone, empires now will only start with their single home system. And from there on, you will need to scout out and find out new systems that are interesting, and then try to expand your empire into that general direction by claiming those systems. So when you build a new outpost, which is the first tier, it is a level 0 starbase that only has basic defense. It's probably similar to a Frontier Outpost, and does not support any buildings and or modules. And it also does not count to a new system that is being added, which is Starbase Capacity, which is very similar to Fleet Capacity, and it's going to add a new element within the game UI. And building an outpost in a system costs influence, with the cost dependent on how far away the system is and how contiguous it is to your empire as a whole. So basically, it's very similar to the way Frontier Outposts and faraway planets work. So that is rather interesting. So basically, you can expand in multiple directions, or they can basically snake your way through, or just build in a ring or something along those lines. So it is, hold on, let me quickly check here. Depending on how far away the system is. Okay, so the further your system is away, it doesn't actually specify what that is based on, whether or not it's on your borders or your home planet, capital planet, or something along those lines. So that's very interesting. Yeah, well, that could be curious. We'll have to take a look at that. Starbases do not cost any influence is in terms of upkeep, and they only have an upfront cost. That's kind of cool. I do like that. So basically, it does not cost any influence to upkeep, just to build it. So Frontier Outposts currently cost 1 influence to upkeep, and if you have the right tradition, it costs 0.5. But in the new system, it won't cost any influence, which means that you'll have more influence to spend on the actual claiming of other systems, which kind of makes sense in order to balance all this stuff out when it comes to an influence pool. But also, it makes it more important to keep track of your factions, as well as other influence faucets, to more proactively expand your empire, which is kind of interesting as well. So we're going to see a complete redesign there. Yeah, some influence is far more important in the early game. So you're going to need to make your first factions to be particularly happy. Potentially go for a bunch of texts and or traditions that increase the base maximum of influence from your factions as well. So that's going to be a very interesting race there. So Cherryh is definitely going to make things rather interesting when it comes to that. As a side note, because we felt that make middle sense to have a home system with a fully built starbase, but no. Okay, so basically, when you start the game, your home system is already going to be surveyed. There's already going to be a starbase there, and mining and research stations will already be placed on some of those resources. So you'll already have a stronger economy. Now, in the previous update, the base starting mineral count was already increased, and now with the upcoming update, that's going to be completely refurbished as well, where you already have stations in those systems. However, I wonder how that's going to impact energy cost, because obviously there is upkeep on these mining stations as well. It also means that you will never have your starting system without resources, which is rather cool. Interesting. Player starts a little bit random, ensuring that you're never completely without resources. Interesting. Apparently, okay, another thing we have been wary about when working on this is making sure that the building of the outpost for each system does not feel simply like fielding adding tedium. Okay, right now the fact of which systems you choose to spend your limited influence on is extremely important choice. Absolutely, you want to focus on those systems that have a lot of resources in it. So high resources become priority, and you want to build towards those, or build an influence station somewhere. And there's going to be various tweaks and interface improvements to make the process a lot easier. That makes sense. Maybe something similar to the sector system that you can queue up. Hey, I want to have a station here, here, and here, and basically go into a certain direction. It's very interesting. And apparently there's not going to be any entirely empty systems. So basically some system with no resources. So basically right now in the game there's quite a lot of systems that literally have nothing of any interest in them. So every single system's going to have resources in them. So overall the total resource count is most likely going to go up, which is fascinating really, because it means that your initial... I wonder if this is going to mean there's going to be a total rebalance of total costs, because you'll be able to crank out a lot of ships very quickly, or at least tech up a lot quicker if there's resources in a lot of systems. And maybe they should probably spread that out a little bit, so that's interesting. So Starbase capacity is a number that represents the total upgraded starbases that they can support. So there are 5 levels of the starbase, which are the outpost, which do not count to the starbase capacity, the starport, which is the first level, the starhold, the star fortress, and finally the citadel. And every single one of these supports a certain amount of quote-unquote modules as well as buildings. So there is upgrades similar to a star base that you have right now orbiting a planet. Basically, you will be able to build modules and buildings on those, and with a maxed out of 10, which is very interesting. And there's a picture here with a star base, which is or at least a citadel that's 11k in fleet power, and it's got a bunch of defenses on it, and you can apparently build a bunch of the same modules on top of that structure in multiple ways, which is very interesting. So apparently, regardless of the level of starbase, as long as it's not an outpost, you will always, so long as it's not an outpost, it will use 1 starbase capacity. It will show up on the map in the outliner. So basically, anything over a outpost will always use 1 starbase capacity. So if you have 5 starbase, if you have 5 capacity, you will only be able to build a more advanced building in 5 systems. Which makes sense, because you have fortresses that are strategically placed throughout your empire, and considering the total level of the star bases can be relatively high in terms of defensive power, it makes them important to place in choke node locations. So the overall design is very interesting. So you have minimal stations that you need to manage, which is kind of cool. Going over your starbase capacity will result in sharply increased starbase energy maintenance costs. Alright, that makes sense. Very similar to what we have with fleet capacity right now. If you go over that, you will have increased maintenance costs, so that makes perfect sense. Starbase capacity can be increased by techs, traditions, and such means. So basically, you will probably have something similar to like +1 starbase capacity or +5 starbase capacity. Although I don't think +5 is going to be the case, because you want to keep this relatively rare and confined to certain areas of space. You can also gain a small amount of starbase capacity from the number of pops in your empire. So it'll probably be a multiplier there. So right now, in this example they have right here, galactic ambitions and manifest destinies increase starbase power by 2. And you have a base of 3. And whether or not that is based on your type of empire is not clear as of right now. But it looks like, I wouldn't be surprised actually if certain empires can have more star bases based on the basically on their ethics. So for instance, maybe militarists will get more, or pacifists will get more, etc. And maybe also different buildings based on the different type of ethics that you can have. If you end up over your starbase capacity for whatever reason, it's possible to downgrade a starbase back in the outpost. And you can dismantle them entirely as well, as long as it's not within a colonized system. Makes sense. Starbases, starports, and ship constructions. So this is the big one for me. And this is probably also going to be the big one for a lot of players Obviously, the border rework is a pretty big deal, but this one right here is pretty damn amazing. Starbases fully replace starports in the role of system and planetary defense, and here's the kicker, military ship production. So spaceports will still be there, but they do not longer separate stations, but rather than they will be part of the actual planet, and they can only build civilian ships. Now here's the thing, only build civilian ships, science ships, construction ships, and colony ships. Are we going to get trade ships? That's what I'm wondering. That would be really cool. To build military ships, you will need a starbase with at least one shipyard module. And you can have more than one shipyard module, which means you can build multiple ships in parallel. This, in combination with, say, a fleet builder, could completely change the way ships are being built en masse. Not having to micromanage your starbases. And in addition, this also means that you will no longer have an outliner with 25 million planets on it that you individually need to select. It's like, okay, I want to have built ships here, 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 and here. Instead, you go to the outliner with Starbase. It's like, okay, I want to build 5 cruisers here, 3 battleships here, a ton of frigates here, and done. And just roll them off the factory line, which is actually really cool and a very interesting way to streamline everything. Starbase has also replaced spaceports planets in a way that they are now the primary place to repair, upgrade, dock, and rally ships. Those civilian ships will still be able to repair planets. That makes sense. That's fine by me. Star Fortress. There's a bunch of shipyards in this one. There's apparently modifier effects to this one as well. So you can have reduction in costs, reduction in speed, and there's another item here which is almost the same icon. I'm not entirely sure. I think it's repair time. So basically, you'll be able to decrease those effects or increase those effects whenever necessary. Modules and buildings. All non-outpost starbases can support modules and buildings. So basically, you'll be able to build additional modules on top of what you already have. So basically, right now at Starbases, you have like an observatory or a fleet academy or something along those lines. So this is all going to change. So this is an interesting one. For example, trading hubs can be added. Trading hubs, which increase the economy of the colonized system. Does this mean we're going to see implementation of a proper internal trading system? Or is this just going to be a flat bonus to the local system of all the minerals that are being produced there? Because obviously, well, not so much obviously, but maybe the total output of resources from a system is going to be listed somewhere, and then a flat bonus is being added that, or internal trade is finally going to be a thing, which would be really cool. Another example that is being set here is a shipyard, gun batteries, hangar bays, an anchorage, so that's interesting. Also buildings potentially that can increase the here we go. So a comm jammer, disruption field, warp fluctuator. Maybe we can no longer have people like jump out. A command center. This is a cool one. Off-world trading company and naval logistical office, which is interesting. Each anchorage gives an additional 1 naval capacity. Because obviously shipyards would basically, because spaceports are generating naval capacity currently in the game, at least as of 1.8. Interesting. So you maybe will need to build a ton of naval logistical offices in order to keep things going. You can have you cannot have multiple. Okay, you cannot have multiples of the same building on the same starbase. So interesting. So you can only have buildings, which are the ones that I just mentioned. Interesting. So there are a lot of buildings that are being moved around. I like how some of these icons that are here, like in instance the communication jammer, is iconography from like a really old build of the game, like the 1.0 had some of these icons. I like that they're reusing some of the old stuff that is no longer in the game. So let's talk about defenses a little bit. It looks like the fortresses and citadels and every single one above the base will be able to build defense stations around the main platform. So you will have a gigantic friggin' fortress up to 40, maybe higher. There's been some murmurings on Twitter about it can go significantly higher than 60k as a full-on defense fleet. This means that in war, attacking a planet is, like, for instance, let's say you have 6 planets, right? You can no longer build the defense thing around it anymore because of the Starbase. I wonder if the Starbase is still going to add firepower on top of it, or whether or not it's significantly going to be reduced. But basically, the main reason why offensive war in the early game are a huge risk is because of the Starbase that's around the planet, and if you don't have a fleet higher than 2k, you're going to run into problems. This system is potentially going to completely revolutionize this, because some planets you may not want to put a Starbase around. Interesting. Very interesting. Especially in the war goal system. I wonder how this is going to work. Very cool stuff. Starbases, with the exception of outposts, will have the ability to construct defense platforms to protect them. We already talked about this a little bit. Giving the Starbases the firepower need to engage entire fleets. The exact details are still being worked on, blah blah blah. Starbases to build defensible scale against fleet across the whole game rather than being completely outpaced in the late game. Okay then. 600,000 fleet power stations, please. With millions of defense platforms. Basically, I'm getting Halo flashbacks with gigantic Mac cannons all over the place. This is pretty damn amazing. I'm really hyped up about this. One last note on Starbases. For a variety of reasons, among them to avoid something like the tedium of rebuilding a starport that happens at the end of war, Starbases cannot be destroyed through conventional means. However, they can be disabled and they need to be captured. More on this on a couple of weeks. From what I understand as well is that you need to capture these stations before you can take the planet. And next week, apparently they're going to be talking about faster than light speed. Now, I can already give a little bit of ideas about what that is going to be about. I have a couple of assumptions I'm going to make here. The developers have been very clear that they are not happy about how the way FTL works, and that we can expect a full revamp of the FTL system, where you most likely will start out with a single type of FTL, and then a certain area of space is blocked off, and you can only get there if you develop new FTL or wormholes or anything along those lines. And if you have like maybe things are hiding there. This was all covered in the live commentary from PDXCon from earlier this year. I'll link it down in the description if you want to check that out. But very cool stuff there as well. And in addition, finally, there was a tweet that went out earlier this week where Wiz was saying, "I'm currently experimenting with galactic terrain." And the picture was basically saying, hey, you're in a pulsar system. That means your shields will no longer work. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. Your shields may potentially no longer work in pulsar systems. That is amazing. Like, if stuff like that can happen in, like, with different variants, like, hey, this is a different type of star. There's different effects in this type of space. If you're a nebula, there's no sensors here. You can hide fleets. That's just amazing. I am flabbergasted. This is the run-up to Stellaris 2.0. This is gonna change everything. 1.9. I'm gonna have to redo pretty much every single one of my beginner videos because this is pretty crazy. I wasn't planning on actually doing a video on this. I'm currently in California to do a bunch of things, mostly like a bunch of business stuff related. So I'm sadly a little bit out of my place, and I'm literally holding my podcast microphone in a bed. So yeah. Regardless, I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and leave your comments below. This is basically going to be a new game, like ridiculously. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourselves, and as always, each other.